Story 1. The Midnight Intruder. It was the summer of 2009, and I had just graduated from high school. To celebrate, my parents allowed me to spend a week at our family's cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. It was an old, rustic place that had been in the family for generations. My father used to go there to fish, and my mother always loved the wildflowers that bloomed around the property. Since it was my first solo trip, I made sure to pack enough supplies and take my dad's old rifle, just in case. I wasn't much of a hunter, but I knew enough to handle it. The cabin was isolated, sitting about 2 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by a dirt path winding through dense forest. I arrived around midday, parked the old Jeep, and unloaded my stuff. The cabin itself was nothing fancy, just a small wooden structure with 2 rooms, a porch that creaked with every step, and windows that looked out into endless stretches of trees. I spent most of the day hiking around, gathering some firewood, and checking the cabin for any signs of wear since the last visit. That evening, I lit a fire, made some canned chili, and sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The woods were alive with sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, and the occasional hoot of an owl. I felt peaceful, free from the stress of exams and graduation. As night fell, the sounds changed. The forest seemed quieter, more still, like it was holding its breath. A low fog began to creep in, swirling around the cabin like fingers. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the mountain air. I locked the door, checked the windows, and settled into the creaky bed with a book. It must have been around midnight when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the window near the porch. My first thought was that it was just a branch swaying in the wind, but when it didn't stop, I knew it wasn't that. Heart pounding, I slid out of bed and crept towards the window. I peeked through the edge of the curtain, trying to be as discreet as possible. What I saw sent ice through my veins. A man standing just outside the window, partially obscured by the fog, his face pressed against the glass. His breath fogged the pane, and his eyes darted around the room as if searching for something. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then he spoke. "Let me in. Please," he whispered, his voice shaky and almost childlike. I backed away slowly, hoping he hadn't seen me. My mind raced. Was he lost, injured, or something worse? I decided to play it safe and called out, "Who's there?" He didn't answer. Instead, he continued to tap, more insistently this time. I thought about the rifle in the corner of the room, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. After a few moments, he stopped tapping and moved away from the window. I peered through the curtain just in time to see him stepping off the porch and disappearing into the fog. I should have felt relieved, but instead, a deep unease settled over me. I stayed up the rest of the night, the rifle in my lap, listening for any sound. Around 3 a.m., I heard a low scraping sound against the wooden wall of the cabin. I couldn't pinpoint the direction, and it seemed to move from one side to the other. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an animal, or the wind. But in my gut, I knew it was him. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I woke up, the sun was peeking through the trees. I cautiously stepped outside, searching for any signs of the man. To my horror, I found long, jagged scratches etched into the wood, circling the cabin. They were too high to be made by any animal. I packed up and left without delay, ignoring the beautiful morning that had replaced the eerie night. As I drove down the winding dirt path, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. A week later, I mentioned the encounter to my father. His face went pale, and he quietly said, "Years ago, there was a man who lived near the cabin, a recluse. One night he snapped, killed his wife, and vanished into the forest. Some say his spirit never left." I never went back to that cabin again, and to this day, the memory of that foggy night and the tapping on the window haunts me. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that whispered plea. Let me in, please. Story 2. The Shadow in the Hallway. It was the winter of 2014, and I had just moved into my first apartment, a small one-bedroom unit in an old, run-down building on the outskirts of Chicago. The rent was cheap, and it was close enough to my workplace to walk. As someone just starting out on my own, it felt like a great deal. The building itself had a musty, almost forgotten feel to it. Peeling paint, flickering lights in the hallway, and an elevator that barely worked. My unit was on the 3rd floor, facing the street, which was constantly noisy with traffic and late-night arguments from the dive bar across the road. Still, it was mine, and I took pride in fixing it up. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. I worked late hours at a nearby diner, so I would come home exhausted, eat something quick, and collapse into bed. One night, after a particularly long shift, I stumbled into the lobby and noticed something strange. An old woman standing at the far end, just staring at me. Her clothes looked worn and dated, like something from the 1950s. She didn't move or say anything, just watched as I passed by. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was just a lonely resident, curious about the new tenant. I forced a polite smile, but she didn't return it. When I got to my floor, I glanced back down the stairwell, but she was gone. That night, as I was brushing my teeth, I thought I heard a faint knock on my door. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, straining to hear it again. Nothing. I shrugged it off, finished up, and went to bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a strange noise, a shuffling sound coming from the hallway. I held my breath, listening as the noise grew louder, like something dragging across the floor. I sat up, heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I convinced myself it was just my tired brain playing tricks on me, but the next night, it happened again. This time I clearly heard it, shuffling footsteps, slowly moving down the hall. I gathered my courage, swung open the door, and looked out. Again, nothing. Just the empty corridor, dimly lit by the flickering overhead light. I couldn't sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept my phone nearby just in case. The next day at work, I told my coworker John about it, half-jokingly blaming it on old building quirks. He gave me a strange look. That building's weird, man. My cousin used to live there. Said he always felt like someone was watching him from the hallway. Ended up moving out after a few months. That made me uneasy, but I wasn't ready to let paranoia get the best of me. That evening, as I was heading back to the apartment, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. A dark smudge on the hallway floor right outside my door. It looked like a trail of soot or ash, leading to my door from the end of the hall. I knelt to touch it, and it smeared on my fingers, cold and greasy. Just then, I heard the elevator ding. I looked up to see the same old woman from the lobby standing at the end of the hall, staring at me. She whispered something I couldn't hear and turned the corner. I rushed after her, but when I reached the stairs, she was gone. I even ran down to the lobby, but it was empty except for the night manager, an older man with thick glasses. "Hey," I asked him, "do you know an old woman who lives here? Wears old-fashioned clothes, kind of creepy." He looked puzzled. "Nobody like that lives here. Are you sure you saw someone?" When I described her, he frowned. "You might be talking about Mrs. Kramer. She lived here decades ago. Died in her apartment after a fire broke out. Smoke inhalation got her before the firemen could reach her." The next few nights were unbearable. I kept hearing the shuffling footsteps, and one night they stopped right outside my door. I couldn't bring myself to look through the peephole, fearing I'd see her standing there. Instead, I sat on the floor, clutching my phone, and waited until morning. One night, I woke up to the overwhelming smell of smoke. I bolted upright, coughing, and frantically checked the kitchen. Nothing, but the smell persisted. I opened the front door, and the hallway was filled with a thick, acrid fog. I couldn't see anything but shadows moving within it. Then I heard her voice, clear and guttural, like it was being forced through burnt vocal cords. "Let me in. It's cold. It's so cold." My knees gave out and I slammed the door shut, locking it, shoving a chair under the handle for good measure. I sat there back against the door as the smell of smoke slowly faded. The next morning, I reported the strange occurrences to the building manager, but he just nodded solemnly. That floor's had problems for years. People move out quick. Nobody stays long. Mrs. Kramer's still looking for her apartment, I guess. I moved out a week later, found a new place closer to work. Sometimes I still have nightmares of the hallway, filled with smoke, and the old woman staring at me through the fog. I did some research after I moved out, and found out that Mrs. Kramer's body was found right outside what had become my apartment door. To this day, I avoid walking down dimly lit hallways. Every so often, if I catch a whiff of smoke or see a shadow in the corner of my eye, I can't help but wonder if Mrs. Kramer finally found someone else to haunt, or if she's still waiting outside my old door, whispering to be let inside.